Well, happy Sabbath to everyone. It's good to be with all of you here today on, I think it's probably one of the better weekends we've had in quite a while weather-wise. So that's certainly a nice thing to be able to enjoy on the Sabbath day. Recently, a stranger, someone I had just recently met within the last couple minutes, asked me, "What are you passionate about?" That's a rather deep question to ask someone you met just a little while ago. I stumbled a little bit with the answer, but I kind of felt like I shouldn't have. She was asking it in the relation to the kind of work I do. We're in the same industry, so it wasn't really all that awkward. What she was really asking me, though, was not so much what do I do, but why do I do it? That's kind of like what your passion is, why you do something. It's not just what you do every day, but why do you do it? Why are you passionate about something? I had already started working on this message when she asked me this question, so it's kind of interesting that it kind of fit into somewhat about what I wanted to talk to you about today. And that is, as a Christian, are you more focused on what you do or why you do it? We can describe almost anything we do with three different phrases. What do you do? How do you do it? And why do you do it? There's almost a progression there. There's a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek, who's a speaker and an author that I really enjoy. And he says, companies that describe themselves using what, how, and why in that order are doomed to be ordinary and forgotten. Companies that find their mission and their passion by reversing the order and starting with why are the ones with devoted and loyal customers, and they do remarkable things. So let me give you an example to illustrate that. I'm going to talk about two different athletic companies. The first one defines themselves starting with what? So what do they do? We sell the best sports shoes and sports equipment. How do you do this? Well, we use the latest research and technology to manufacture our products for demanding athletes. And so why do you do this? Well, we want to create a quality product that will exceed our customers' expectations. Now, this is a fictitious company. I kind of made that part up. But let's look at another company. It's one that you all know. See if you can guess who they are. It's another athletic company in the same industry, but they start with what they do and how they're driven by asking why. They want to inspire the world to push beyond barriers, to do things that seem impossible, to realize their dreams when they want to give up. How do they do this? They get people excited about sports, and they bring these people closer together. So what do? They just happen to sell sports shoes and other equipment. You can see this in their advertising. Nike ads don't tout some great breakthrough in comfort or performance of their latest shoe. They show professional and amateur athletes obtaining their goals, pushing their limits, and not giving up. The fact that they're wearing a certain shoe is almost secondary because they're selling a vision and not a product. They tell people to just do it. And this is what happens when you start with why. Start with Why is the name of a book that Simon Sinek wrote, and it's also the title of my message today. So I have a question for all of you. When you look at your passion and your motivation as a Christian, are you starting with what you do, or are you starting with why? Is what you do today, is what you do that defines you as a Christian, or is it why you do it that defines you as a Christian? So let's run through an example of two different people. The first one starts with what? What does this person do as a Christian? Well, I know that I need to follow God's laws, and I need to be a good person. I should teach others what I know, and I should serve others. It's admirable, right? How do they do this? Well, they're a good example. They obey the 10 Commandments. They love others, and they keep the Sabbath and holy days. So why do they do this? Well, they want to be a good Christian. It's what everybody else in my church is doing. My parents might have taught it to me. It's what I've always done. So let's look at someone that starts with why. Why am I a Christian? Well, I want to be a child of God. I want to have an impact on others and show them the right way to live. I want to live my life the way God designed and help spread that to the entire world and one day teach all humanity how to live in the kingdom of God. I want to see the church that Christ established thrive. Well, how are you going to do that? I follow God's laws. I love and forgive my enemies. I keep the Sabbath and holy days. So what's the result of you doing all this? Well, my family benefits from living God's way of life. Through service, I'm able to help others. I'm a good example. I examine myself to further my conversion. I'm able to pass on God's truth to future generations, and I support a work that continues God's mission. So, are you a Christian that starts with what, or are you a Christian that starts with why? Now, I think everybody starts with why, at least around my house. You get asked why, about 100, 400 times a day. I actually heard someone say that, small children ask 400 to 500 questions a day, and I think it's about double that in my house. But, you can't just ask why. You've also got to answer it. You got to have the answer to it. So let's look at an example from the Bible in this. I want to turn to Daniel. Daniel, the first chapter. This is the story of Daniel and three of his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, the story here is that they had been selected by the king to be a part of some government training program for leadership. That's a pretty prestigious thing, right? Especially since they weren't really of the culture there, of that area. And the story here in the first part of Daniel chapter 1 is that as part of this training program, they were given a portion of the king's delicacies to eat. That's part of what they were, part of being in this training program. Man, it's probably a pretty good deal, probably pretty good food. But Daniel had a problem with this. In Daniel chapter 1 and verse 8, it says, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. So there's a Life Open Truth article on this called Daniel's Three Friends, and I want to read kind of the explanation as to what's going on here from that article and quote it. It says, while we aren't told specifically why Daniel didn't want to defile himself with the king's provisions, it was likely because the king's food may have included the meat of animals that God said were not to be eaten. Or it could have included some animal fat, which God said was not to be eaten either. As to why Daniel and his friends would have refused the wine, which was permitted by God to be consumed in moderation, it could have been because part of the wine may have been used as a drink offering to a heathen deity. So it's interesting here that they didn't just not partake of this food, though. They told the people involved that, well, we're not going to eat this. We want you to give us this other food, and we want to give us some vegetables and that sort of thing. That's things that they could eat. And they said, well, let's see after a certain amount of time who's in better shape, who's looking better. And it turns out Daniel and his three friends were way better. So they not only didn't just not eat the food. I mean, I've been in that situation, especially as a kid. That was one of the hardest things. You're over at a friend's house or something, and somebody's got pepperoni pizza, and you don't want to be called out or singled out. You don't want to be the weird one, right? But you don't want to make a big deal about it. But these guys, they didn't just not make a big deal about it. They actually challenged what they were being given here, and made a fuss about it to kind of show that we're not going to do this. So it's interesting because if they did that, were they really just doing the what Were they just doing what God had told them to do? No. They were really focused on why are we doing this, and putting that in front of these people to help to make a point and calling it out. It's interesting that they went that direction. So I have 2 reasons for you today about why we should be starting with why as to defining our Christianity. So starting with why will help you define keep the right perspective on what you should be doing and what you should be focusing on. So if I have the perspective that I just need to be present at holy days and Sabbath services, and I repeat the routine every week and every year, but I might lose the true reason why I'm keeping God's Sabbath and holy days. And that's probably not what I should be focusing on. Being a Christian is a lot more than just being present, right? Keeping the perspective of why we are here each week, why we rehearse God's holy day plan each year, will keep us focused on our continual process of conversion. If furthering Christ's mission for the church to preach the gospel and prepare his saints is what we're focused on, we'll have the right focus, and the how and the what of our Christianity will flow naturally. The second point is starting with why puts the motivation for being a Christian really in your heart. If we look back at Daniel 1 and verse 8, it said, Daniel purposed in his heart. It kind of gets to the core of who you are. If you look at going from why you do something to how you do it to what you end up doing, really, you could also define that as what is your purpose, what's the process or what you do to go about doing it, and then the result. So we could also look at that from the perspective of it's going from more of a spiritual concept to the physical being the result, the manifestation of what you're doing as the fruit of being a Christian. And if the reasons that we're going to do something come from the heart, we'll have a much more solid foundation. It's going to be a lot harder for Satan to tempt us in those ways. Whereas if we're just doing things because we're checking them off a list someone gave us, it's probably not going to, it would be a lot easier to be tempted to stray from God's way. So one interesting thing I thought about through preparing this message is that I grew up in the church, and I think most people that grow up in the church, their Christianity when they're younger is defined by what they do. You start with what in that scenario? Well, I've been kind of like the first Christian I described. I know that I'm supposed to keep the Sabbath, and I know that my parents have taught me I need to keep the holy days and not eat pepperoni and do these things, and you may be good about doing them, but it's when you finally realize and that light bulb goes off that you need to figure out why I'm doing this. That I think the conversion process and God starts working with you to put that into your heart. So it's an interesting thing to think about for those that are second generation, third, fourth. I don't know if we have any fifth here, but there's a lot of babies have been born recently, so who knows. But I thought that was an interesting side note to this, and for those that are second or were taught God's ways growing up, that you got to get to that why before it really becomes yours, and what God is really calling you towards. So as a Christian, are you someone that's defined by what you do or why you do it? For us to have really a strong foundation with God's way of life in our hearts, we really need to make sure that we start with why.